Hey, it's Sleepy Reader. I've got some comic book thoughts on the comic books I read. I just finished reading recently, but they're from 2 Wednesdays ago, so I'm kind of running behind a bit on my comic book thoughts. I'm still doing it countdown style. I've got 10 comics, and I will rank them from my least favorite to my most favorite, and that's always a extremely subjective process, and it's just based on my reactions when I read the comic, how I felt about them at the time. Could be all kinds of random factors coming into that. And this week was particularly hard to rank the comics because I had a pretty good time reading every single one. There were no standout really bad comics, and there were no standout killer comics either. There were a bunch of them that I read that I basically liked for the art, and a bunch that I read that I thought, well, this is amusing, but how many issues of this do I want to read? Like, I can enjoy it now, but as a weekly and monthly comic book reader, I'm always thinking ahead. How long am I going to enjoy this? Where is this going? Is this taking me anywhere that I need to go? I guess for the creators, it's kind of a catch-22. If you're constantly doing new things, you have to get readers to jump back on board all over again. But some projects, some ideas only need to run a certain amount of time. Now, interestingly, actually, at what I'm ranking number 10 was Chrome. Sorry, not Chrome, Crone, which I'm partially ranking this low because I didn't love the overall series. It got better with issue 4 and 5, and issue 5 here is the final issue. And and it was a pretty good wrap up to everything that happened to our sort of elderly, once a Red Sonja kind of sword and sorcery heroine who saved the kingdom, and now the kingdom's in danger again. They did a pretty good job of having her pull everything together at the end after all the setbacks, and fairly quickly wrap us up with a satisfying, quote, happy ending, I suppose, to however extent it can be in sword and sorcery kind of stories. But so I kind of enjoyed this issue, but my overall feeling about Crone as a series was that it was a very minor experience reading it. Sadly, you can't. It's kind of tricky to make. They did a good effort at trying to make sword and sorcery new, but it didn't quite click. Even though going into it, I thought, wow, what a great idea, an elderly heroine who has to come back and battle. Sometimes you see the older hero do it, but it was interesting twisting that with the woman and putting it in the sword and sorcery setting. But and I have great qualms at putting this sort of Flash 750th celebration. I don't know if it's 80 years the way it was for Batman and Superman. Also, I suspect not quite 80 years, but maybe it's been 80 years. This was a little bit cheaper, and I think a little bit thinner than the celebratory issues like Detective Comics 1000 and Action Comics 1000. Yeah, Action Comics 1000. And my favorite of all these, and I got the Wonder Woman one too, my favorite of all of these was the Action one, and I don't know if that's because I have the strongest nostalgia for Superman, and he was the first superhero, so celebrating his 1000th issue was really cool. None of the stories were bad in here, but none of them were super exciting to me. Some of the art worked really well, some didn't. This one is part of the main storyline that's been going on in The Flash, and I really did not enjoy especially the coloring here, but the art didn't particularly excite me. But the coloring was, I don't know, that kind of coloring that gets shiny in some way and bounces me off a little bit. But it wasn't bad to read. And I'm slightly intrigued by this villain. I've already forgot what his name is. He looks pretty cool. And then the thing I liked best in this Flash issue were the pinup pages, which hasn't really been true in the other celebratory issues. That one's by Doc Shaner. Here's one by Howard Porter that looks pretty cool, showing all these different Flashes. Actually, the story I liked the best was by Jeff Johns. I wasn't crazy about the art, but it was kind of about, just a day in the life of Captain Cold, and it was kind of cool. And it was interesting in the way that it showed us that the Flash doesn't always know what's going on with the villains or what's motivating them or why they're doing what they're doing, and can wildly misunderstand a moment or two with the villains. There's another pinup, Kid Flash. Oh, and this was a really cool pinup by Mick Gerards. Is it Mick? What's his first name? Mitch Gerards. Sorry, Mitch Gerards. That was really cool. Shades of, it almost has a Norman Rockwell look to it, which I thought was really fun. Come on, focus. There we go. Really nice art by Francis Manapul. I miss reading comics by Francis Manapul. I guess, has he been doing the world's finest type comic lately? I haven't been following that. But the story itself was kind of minor. It was kind of an interesting idea to look at who would be the guardian of, who would take the Flash's place in different worlds. And then we got the Flash of All Worlds, with great art by Riley Rossmo, a decent script by Marv Wolfman, but and with some nice callbacks to some goofy Flash stuff, like the time he got a big head. I like that in particular. Time he became a puppet. Excuse me. Then we got some stuff that was a tie-in to the new reboot they're about to do, I believe. Here's a great Dale Eaglesham pinup. Yeah, I need more Dale Eaglesham. He's perfect at DC. And then there was this interesting thing by Scott Lobdell about Wally West taking the place of Metron. And I guess, has that maybe happened in some other comics that I haven't read yet? So that kind of intrigued me. So, it wasn't, like I said, because all the comics I had were fun to read, but it just wasn't too special to me. Nothing got me super excited there. And then there was this comic called Marvel, which I guess is somehow tied into Marvels, which was Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross's take on the early history of the Marvel Universe from the point of view of a photographer on the street watching events like the Fantastic Four fighting Galactus and such. And I got the variant cover. It wasn't it was a same price variant cover drawn by Steve Rude rather than the Alex Ross cover. Alex Ross covers are great, but I am super Steve Rude fan. So that's what made me happiest in this book was the Steve Rude story, which was a retro Avengers, probably shortly after Avengers number 4 back in the 60s, taking place, where the Hulk gets a hold of one of Tony Stark's machines that makes his things in his imagination come to life. So he has the Hulk Avengers disassemble. So for an old fan of the old time Marvel comics, this was fun, but it was not a great story, even though it was written by one of my favorite writers, Kurt Busiek. I'm not sure how to say his name. But he didn't really have a lot to say here, but it made a nice vehicle for Steve Rude. So I really like the art. Then there was this other story. So these are just like random stories out of the Marvel Universe, I guess, from possibly unusual points of view. Another story that was framed, Spider-Man story where he's fighting the Rhino, who is usually a villain I really enjoy. He's fighting the Rhino, and the story is framed by an argument he's having with Mary Jane. And that's a cool idea. I wouldn't be surprised if it's been done before. Even though at first glance you would think the painted art kind of reminds you of Alex Ross, there was something about this painted art that kind of annoyed me, and the story was just kind of glib in a way that, it was okay to read. And then there's a framing story from Alex Ross, so it's fun to see Alex Ross doing some interiors. The framing story, I don't exactly get how the framing story connected to the stories it framed, but it's kind of cool visually where Nightmare is taking over all of humanity on Earth. And so we get cool scenes like that, painted by Alex Ross and written by Alex Ross. So I really don't know, if I'm just bought this for Steve Rude, I don't know if I need to buy the next issue. It's because Steve Rude's not in it. Now, there will be a little more Alex Ross art. Here's a cool, that's the next cover, which looks like a retro take on the Black Widow, I think. Featuring stories by Dan Brereton, Eric Powell, that's kind of good. Paulo Rivera, that's kind of good. But it's a $5 book, and it seems like it is on nice cardboard, and they do actually give you 30 pages of story with that price. So it's actually not a bad deal in terms of physical content, but I like to think I like anthology short stories, but it just seems kind of weightless. And there's so many comics to buy, and it's a slightly more expensive comic. So I don't know if I'll get it again. Probably will depend on how compulsive I'm feeling the day the next issue comes out. Then we got Savage Avengers up at number 7. Marvel, this comic Marvel was number 8. Flash was number 9. I've been really enjoying the Savage Avengers. This is probably my least exciting issue so far, maybe because there's no Conan in it. And it's lacking in other... I do like Doctor Strange, but it was a weird story. I didn't really know that Elektra and Doctor Strange are in a relationship, but I didn't sort of come to understand anything about their relationship from this issue. The art's pretty cool, actually, as I'm showing it. But most of the story is Doctor Strange astral projecting back in time to find out how this villain that they can't stop, this sorcerer who keeps coming back to life, who dates back to Hyborian times, Kulan Gath, something like that. Doctor Strange is basically exploring the sorcerer's history. And somehow it just wasn't very compelling. Even though there's great art here showing us stuff, it felt more like telling than showing, perhaps. But then I wasn't quite sure what it was telling us. So anyway, it was as I'm realizing here, and there's Conan, I guess, for a brief panel. As part of the flashback, he gets to kill Kulan Gath a couple times. So, and now is Kulan Gath drawn originally from this story here? Because that's a redo of a panel right out of a early Barry Smith Conan issue, maybe number 11 or 12, with the Emerald Empress. And there's some annoying what I thought was minor sorcerer here who she kills off after he raises her back from the dead. So that little bit was intriguing to me about this story. And it was very grim and brutal and everything. But ultimately, I just couldn't get into it as much. I mean, like I say, I enjoyed everything that came out this month, but it was the less exciting Savage Avengers. And here was an interesting book, Join the Future, a first issue from Aftershock. I made a mistake because I've been planning not to get Aftershock books in floppies because every first issue that comes out is now $5, $4.99. And what they give you for your $5 is one of these thick covers, like the Marvels cover here. But the Marvels had at least 30 pages for your extra dollar. This has your regular 20 pages, I believe. And then it has some text material at the back, which I didn't read. Maybe it would be more interesting. What tempted me by this, along with the fact that I kind of stopped paying attention to the price for a moment, is it has another one of my favorite artists, current artists, named Piotr Kowalski. I think I talked about him recently, actually. He was on another book, which I don't think has finished yet. I hope that book's still running. What was it called? Wellington. But Peter, or however you pronounce his name, is just a really compelling artist to me. And here we get this science fiction world. Well, you're seeing here these people living like they're in the frontier days of the United States. But in the background is this super futuristic city. And so almost everyone is moving to the future, to the futuristic city that advertises itself as Join the Future and shows you the perfect life you'll have in the city. We haven't learned yet what the catch is, but we meet all these people who refuse to move into the city, but essentially are being pressured one way or another, which does make the city seem kind of evil. So from this issue, I couldn't really tell where this story was going. This girl who has asthma and is part of a family who refuses to join the comfortable future is probably going to be the hero. Her brother gets killed on the last page, but I don't know where it's going, and I feel kind of ripped off by the marketing tricks of Aftershock. So I think I'm going to go. I don't think I'm going to keep picking it up, but I would love to read it in trade, or again, maybe if I'm feeling impulsive. And now I've already bought the most expensive issue. The rest will be $3.99. So I'm not sure if I'll keep up with this or read it in trade or even digitally some point, when I can get it on Hoopla or somewhere like that. So it was interesting, just didn't quite, how it's best when a first issue gives you a strong sense of what kind of story you're going to be reading and whether you want to keep reading it or not. Similar kind of problems came with King of Nowhere. I enjoyed this a lot. The art took some getting used to. It's from Tyler Crook, and it's very, like, he's painting with ink, and then over that, his wife, I believe, is painting with color. I think she's using watercolors on top of his very inky drawings. This felt fun. It kind of reminded me of, like, Nightbreed by Clive Barker. But we have this guy thinks he's in a dream, but eventually finds out things are real. I like the idea that he's a person who always makes bad choices and does the stupid thing. And there's a bunch of fun scenes, like a big shootout with giant iguanas. But I can't really tell where this is going. From what I got out of this first issue, I'd probably enjoy maybe one or two more issues, and then I'd want the story to be done. Maybe a lot more will be added. Intriguingly, it's only the second book I've ever seen by the author W. Maxwell Prince of Ice Cream Man, my favorite current comic. So it's on my pull list already, and I'll probably just hang in there because it was certainly fun to read. I just, at the moment with this issue, can't see where it's going. I also wonder why Maxwell switched over to Boom rather than sticking with Image. Is Boom giving the independent writers as good of a deal as Image is these days? Maybe they are. Or maybe they can promise more promotion. I love this fish-faced character here. Yeah, the downside really was getting used to the art. So, even though he's the author of my favorite comic, he doesn't have, Maxwell Prince doesn't have a track record with me of producing one great comic after another, which is a lot to ask. It's a great achievement to produce one comic as great as Ice Cream Man. So we'll see where that goes. So that was in at number 5. In at number 4, and it could have easily been 5. I could have easily flipped between these two, was Birthright. But Birthright has a huge track record with me. This is issue 42. I've enjoyed it the whole way. It's kind of horror, fantasy, Narnia meets Clive Barker, maybe. and I think it's the best book I've read by Williamson. What's his first name? The guy who writes The Flash, who I probably should be, Joshua Williamson. He's just kept me in it. It has cool art. Sometimes the coloring works better than others. It's very gory. And I know it's heading towards its ending, and I'm glad. I've stuck with it, and I've gone for a long ride, and I've enjoyed the long ride, but I'm pretty close to ready for an end to this. And I think we are in the midst of the climax, I think. So that was my number 4. And then at number 3, I put Billionaire Island, which I had really mixed feelings about. It's the return of the team of Steve Pugh and Mark Russell. They were the artist and writer on the incredible Flintstones series that DC put out a few years ago that pretty much put Mark Russell on the map for us hardcore comic book readers. And he just recently wrapped up Second Coming, and now he's taking his shot at Millionaires about 20 years from now, as the millionaires try to escape crumbling society after global warming's pretty much wrecked the earth. And it's got a lot of clever things. There's a reporter who my daughter pointed out, because we looked at parts of this together. There are other parts that would have been too intense. She said this reporter looks like Lois Lane. So this Lois Lane-like reporter gets tricked by the billionaire, who's the founder of Billionaire Island, to go through a doorway. And on the other side of the door is a giant gerbil cage that also with various prisoners in it. And the prisoners have to do kind of reality TV types of things for the entertainment of the billionaires, I believe. And they think they're going to get out, or some of them do. There they are, all trying to grab money. So it's very clever and intriguing, and I appreciate the dark political satire. Since it's the exact same team as on Flintstones, I kind of compare it to that. And what I miss here that the Flintstones had is even the, quote, bad guys, or the power-hungry people, or the people who in one way or another are doing what might be viewed as bad things that he's satirizing, they all had a touch of humanity to them. There was all a side of, not sympathy is the wrong word, but relatability. Whereas the evil billionaire in here is just purely evil from start to finish. It's hard to see any kind of comical, likable, or quirkiness about him that makes him more fleshed out and gives the satire, takes the bite of the satire and gives it something more than just a biting satire, if that makes sense. That was kind of the miracle of Flintstones to me, that he used. First it was bizarre that he used the Flintstones as a satire of all kinds of aspects of humanity and civilization, but then he just gave it an extra layer of humanity while satirizing things. So we'll see where he's going with here. It certainly feels worth reading to me. If you're a person who doesn't want to hear more dire warnings about global warming and things like that, and that's certainly understandable at this point, you may not want that in your escapist comic book reading, then this would not be a good read. So, and again, we're up to number 3, near the top of my list, but it's still not a comic that I enjoyed reading it, but I didn't go, wow. And in fact, in some ways, the closest to wow is my number 2, Pink Lemonade number 2. And actually the 3rd issue of Pink Lemonade I read because I also got the Christmas special, I think it was, or winter special, which I think were older web comics that were being reprinted. But this continues the story such as it is from issue number 1. But it takes on, it has a really fun take on 90s cartoons that were also toy franchises, and blurs the line between the actors who play them and their characters, and maybe were the character and became the actor on the show. And Pink Lemonade is being tricked into becoming one of these commodities, but she's a huge fan of one of the past commodities. What's his name? OJ Bot or something like that. Big OJ Bot. And so there's all kinds of levels of goofiness and irony, really pleasing color and artwork, which evokes, it's a bit Steve Root-ish at times, and like Steve Root, evokes a variety of artists from Silver Age comics. And it has that feel of, there's that sort of underground comics movement of some bizarre, twisted nostalgia for 80s and 90s comics, like in Copra and in, I forgot the name of that other series that's now being published by Floating World. It'll come to me after I finish recording. But what kept this from being number 1 is it was almost too much. It's kind of exhausting, and the story just kind of, I mean, in a way, it's charming the way the story just kind of floats along and meanders a bit, even though it has some real points to make and everything. But it just, by the end of the comic, there was a backup by a different artist, and it was even more kind of, what's the word? Tongue-in-cheek kids comics or whatever. And I just had enough. So I loved reading it, and then I had enough. Hopefully Pink Lemonade won't come out too often, and then I'll be real excited when the next one comes out. Because I'm really enjoying it. But like I say, there's only so much of this I can take at a given time. So part of me wants him to maybe do 2 more issues and then go on and do something else. And by him, I mean Nick Cagnetti, very talented fellow, very clever and gentle in his humor, which I really appreciate. Complete opposite of Billionaire Island, I guess, with the harsh satire. This is very gentle satire, and make sure to stay with the innocent joys of life in a lot of ways, which goes well with the childhood nostalgia with toys and cartoons. Let's have a sip of something. Be hard to say big drum roll for number 1, because number 1 was just by a tiny hair more number 1 than my top 4. And in the larger scheme of things, it's no Ice Cream Man, it's no Lucifer, but my favorite comic of this batch was Daphne Byrne. And again, it was the art that led the way. The art by Kelly Jones just seems to be getting better with every issue. The creepy gothic Victorian era, I don't think this is actually the Victorian era, but somewhere close to the Victorian era, mood of everything is just spot on, perfect the way Kelly Jones does it. And it's only Kelly Jones style. I mean, you have to almost be acclimated to Kelly Jones already, perhaps, to fully love this stuff. I don't know. Like, if you've never seen any Kelly Jones art, what would you think here? But I really love the art. And the story seems to be improving. I'm quite intrigued by this otherworldly, supernatural person thing that is kind of haunting our young girl, our Daphne Byrne, and seemingly trying to liberate her or open her up to some horrible power that she has. And then there's this subplot where the what do you call it? The woman who runs the seances has tricked her mother, Daphne's mother, into becoming some kind of sacrifice for some kind of occult cult. So we'll see where all that goes. I did not get the Strange Tales, the Adam, is it called Strange Tales? Strange Adventures, the Adam Strange comic. I'm forcing myself to wait till that comes out in trade. Because I'm afraid that Tom King will be frustrating to me issue by issue, and I'll appreciate him more in the collected edition. So sorry if I'm a bit fading away here. It is late at night, and I will be going to sleep soon. So maybe I'll be back in a few days in a few days, I'll soon be back because I've already filmed part 2 of my haul video that I released part 1 of a few days back. And then I'll be back fairly soon with another comic book countdown of the 9 comics I got this past Wednesday. So anyway, talk to you all again soon.